If you were spanked as a child, do you remember what you were being spanked for? Did you only get spanked one time and stop getting in trouble after that?
I could be a mess, stressed in yesterday. He don't care less. He sees me anyway. Yeah, he sees me anyway. My dog thinks I'm great. He thinks I'm number one. He never hates, even when I'm done.
Welcome to Dog Leads with my husband, Steve Bishop. He's a certified dog trainer, has a bachelor's of arts in psychology with a minor in sociology. Steve is a Family Paws parent educator and a member of the Pet Professional Guild. If you have any questions or would like to suggest a topic, you can reach him at bishopsgatetraining@gmail.com. Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Simple Solutions to Common Problems, a dog training guide by my dad, Steve Bishop. This guide focuses on common challenges that pet owners face, such as barking, jumping, and leash pulling, providing solutions to improve training and enhance the bond between you and your dog. It's available at most online booksellers, and a link will be in the description.
So I keep coming back to this definition thing. I wanted to first start out by defining punishment in scientific terms is decreasing the likelihood of a behavior to occur. And aversives is just something that's avoided, whether it's anything from, I've talked about being critiqued in my art classes, all the way up to being spanked, punched, or something physical. And I talked a couple of episodes a little bit about when we talk about positive punishment, doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. It just means something is added to decrease the likelihood of the behavior to occur. This topic comes from my friend Shannon, who asked if I could talk about the problem with delayed punishment. And I've kind of expanded that to punishment in general, but we'll kind of circle around that, mention it a couple of times. So one of the problems with positive punishment is it has to be delivered on a regular schedule to reduce the behavior. However, if there's a way to gain whatever it is, to get to whatever it is that the person or the dog in this case wants, it's not going to be as effective. So for example, my daughter loves watching videos on her tablet to a fault, and at this point, no matter what we do, we cannot stop her from doing that. We'll put passwords on the tablet so she can't get to something. She finds a way to circumvent those. We block the apps on the tablet, and she stole my wife's phone a couple of times. So that she's finding ways to get that reinforcement that she wants. Likewise, if you have a dog that's doing something they're not supposed to, and I'll go back to that example I always give, the chewing on the coffee table leg, and we punish the dog, they still have that desire, whether it's boredom or they're teething or whatever it happens to be, and so they may go to a chair or a different table, start chewing on that. If they can't find some way to get that reinforcer, that thing that they want to do, that's when we start seeing problems. So it can be escape, which we're going to talk about each of these more in a minute, but it can be escape, aggression, apathy, and it can lead to abuse. So for example, the punisher, the aversive, has to be at a high enough level to stop the behavior, and if it's not, then they may seek out whatever it is that they're finding reinforcing. So I think I gave this example before. The car I used to have, when I would get in and out of it in the winter, I would get shocked, and I hated it. It drove me nuts. But any other reasonable person probably wouldn't have a problem with it, and I recognize that, and I won't go into reasons for it. But on the other hand, sticking your finger in a light socket, for example, getting that shock, most people are going to find that pretty aversive, pretty memorable. So we can't know what's going to be most effective for each individual, and you run the risk of either you start too low with the shock, for example, with the average person. They're not going to think basically a carpet shock is that big of a deal, and the person supplying the aversive is going to increase that level, and what happens is the recipient gets used to it, gets acclimated to it, and so can tolerate more and more and more and more. So I spent the last year building up a tolerance to iocane powder, kind of a thing. On the flip side of that, if you start too harsh right from the beginning, then you run the risk of doing long-term physical or mental damage. So let's talk about escape for a minute. Now, escape doesn't always mean, we call it flight, leaving the situation, getting up and running away. It can be achieved just by stopping or diminishing whatever that aversive stimulus is. This can mean stopping the behavior, but it can also be scaring someone off with a growl or a yell, or totally shutting down. We call it flooding, where you can't do anything, so you just stop all behavior, which also is not good. And then once the behavior proves that it will end that aversive, it's more likely that it's going to be repeated, and this may increase other undesirable behaviors in an attempt to escape the punishment. So if they've been growling or snapping, that may increase, or it may increase up to a bite. And I know I talked a couple of episodes ago about not punishing a growl and how the behavior will decrease. But the difference is, it was episode 18, the growl, if it's respected, you're probably going to start seeing that diminish over time, because the dog knows that it works and they can always fall back on that if it gets too much. And in this case, we're not addressing the growl or the bite, and so those behaviors can potentially increase to where it becomes a real issue. And so again, back to that coffee table leg, if that is taken away, they start seeking out something else to meet that need, then oh my gosh, it becomes this huge issue. The dog's chewing up my whole apartment or my whole house, and the aversive may become more harsh to suppress the behavior to the point of possibly doing bodily harm. The aversive stimulus may become the person or a stimulus in the environment. So talking in a different episode about generalizing, they may generalize that to anything. I mean, it could be anybody wearing a red shirt. I've talked about Puck, who was severely abused before we got him. He did not like tall men wearing hats. He generalized that aversive stimulus. Once that stimulus has been conditioned, or they learn that tall men wearing hats equals aversive stimulus, the dog will attempt to avoid that aversive stimulus. In Puck's case, we had a friend of ours who happened to buy a house across the street from us, and he would come over and visit pretty regularly. Very tall gentleman, he liked to wear hats, nicest guy in the world. But every time he came in, at least until Puck got used to him, which was probably about 6 months, he would bark at this guy. And so he was trying to increase that distance. It's like, I have nowhere to go. It was a small house. So he was trying to increase that distance, or get our friend to move back. So that escape, it wasn't physically getting up and running away. It was just increasing that distance, or trying to increase that distance. Oddly enough, once our friend got into the house and he sat down, Puck was all over him, loved him to death. But it was just that initial walking in, tall guy wearing a hat, that is the aversive stimulus, and this is how I have to react to it. Another good example of this is, I'm a big advocate of using gates to keep the dog out of certain parts of the house. So, for example, we put a gate up when Becca was born, one, so that she wouldn't fall down the basement stairs, and two, so we could separate the dogs from certain parts of the house, particularly overnight, so they weren't getting into stuff they shouldn't be, different baby stuff, toys and whatnot. But we've left those up because they come in really handy. Well, the problem is, with Mal, when he first came to us, he bumped into a couple of them, knocked them over, and they just slammed down, made this really loud noise on the floor. So now he's really apprehensive about walking past a baby gate, even if it's secured, even if it's laying down, something like that. It's become an aversive stimulus, even though there may be no potential for it to fall and make this loud noise that startles them. The problem is, the person, when they add this aversive stimulus and they see a response, they might think they've achieved the desired effect. But for the dog, it's disagreeable. So, okay, we're, I don't know, going to bed, and Malcolm has to walk by a gate that we've left in the foyer. Even though he makes it to the bedroom past the foyer, to the untrained eye, as he slows down and kind of side-eyes this gate, yeah, it's still, he's not comfortable moving past it. Or we have suppressed the Puck barking at our tall friend. We think, okay, that's what we want. He's comfortable with it now, but he may not be. He's still got that stress, that anxiety, but we're just not hearing those barks. So we think, oh, well, it's all better now. He's fine with our friend. It's not enough to suppress a behavior. And I've mentioned that before. We have to give the dog an appropriate alternative, or we have to counter condition the dog to understand that it's okay. So, like with our friend, it took about 6 months, but Puck finally got comfortable with him to the point that our friend could walk into the house, and Puck was a little apprehensive at first still, but yeah, he knew it was okay. And as soon as he went up and sniffed the person, it's like, oh, I know you, you're an okay guy. If you just sit down, I'll jump up in your lap. And so this goes back to something I've talked about before. I don't consider myself a positive reinforcement trainer, although usually that's how I describe myself to just average person. But I prefer the term science-based or reward-based. And again, this goes back to my favorite example. The dog is chewing on the coffee table leg. We want to interrupt that behavior, but interrupting that behavior is technically positive punishment. We're adding something, the word or the noise, that stops the behavior so that we see a decrease in the behavior, or the behavior stopping. But the difference is, and where I fall, is I just use that to interrupt the behavior, not to suppress it. And then I instantly give the dog an appropriate outlet to meet that need. Yes, there is positive punishment, and I'm using finger quotes there, but the learning is going on when I give the dog that appropriate outlet, whether it's, a chew toy or a treat or something like that. I get in this discussion with people sometimes, and they always come back to the same thing. Oh, I was spanked when I was a kid, and I turned out fine. The issue with that is, yeah, you probably turned out okay, or we wouldn't be friends, but you cannot know how you would have turned out if you hadn't been spanked. And we know that spanking or corporal punishment causes stress, and it causes anxiety, and particularly in those formative years. And I talk about in episode 20 and 21 about how things that happen to us when we're younger, when we're going through these certain developmental stages, they can have a lasting effect. So yes, you turned out okay, but how would you have turned out if you hadn't had that hanging over your head for everything that you did? Am I going to get in trouble for this? Going back to my opening statement, I think about it. I was spanked as a child. I remember one time what I did to get spanked, but even after, I think I was 11 last time I was spanked, even up into my teens, I was still getting in trouble. So I was being punished for those behaviors, but I wasn't given an appropriate outlet to, I don't even know what it was, relieve boredom or proper motivation to get my chores done, or whatever it is that kids are usually spanked for. Like I said, I just don't remember what I was spanked for. And I continued to get into trouble up until I was an adult. So some food for thought. I'm sure this is a topic that I'll keep circling back to on a regular basis. So if you have any questions about this topic, or you would like to suggest another topic, you can leave a comment here, or you can email me at bishopsgatetraining@gmail.com.